Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd and this is my review of episode 12 of season 4 of Star Trek Discovery. And I think this is a relatively good episode of the season. My list of complaints is much shorter than usual, and I even want to praise this episode for finally feeling like some good science fiction. Even though some of it is not really that original, a lot of the ideas are borrowed from all kinds of science fiction movies, but at least they borrow them from good science fiction movies and not the silly action adventure kind. And so a lot of this episode felt like good science fiction ideas, and some parts were even kind of clever the way they had to problem solve and invent new creative ideas to make it all work. And so I did enjoy some of those parts, and the fact that the aliens seemed truly alien, all of that is something I always wanted to see more of in Star Trek shows. And if Star Trek would have been realistic, every alien they encounter would be something unique and interesting, and they would have to find new ways to communicate every single time. So obviously it's not a good formula for a TV show in which they want to have a short story in 42 minutes and they cannot spend 30 minutes just trying to communicate with a new alien, so that's why they made up the universal translator. But it's so nice and refreshing that once in a while they do have difficulty with some aliens. The only thing I didn't like is that they didn't actually show us anything from the aliens. They're all basically covered with mist and we don't really see any of their shape or anything, so it's basically just a shadowy figure in some fog. And it really reminds me of the movie Arrival, in which also the entire movie was just about trying to learn how to communicate with aliens, and they were also talking with them through a glass, and they were in some misty environment in which you can barely even see them, and they just had giant tentacles or whatever. So I kind of half expected that to happen in this show, because this show is always taking inspiration from other movies. So we see the aliens through the force field in the cargo bay, and it's all misty there, so we can barely see them, and they're trying to communicate using the smell molecules that they found in the previous episode. And the aliens also transmit some light patterns to it, so they have to cross it together like a complex jigsaw puzzle to figure out how the lights help them arrange the smells so that it will make more sense, that you would know how to read it. So it was kind of interesting in a science fiction way how it was all very unique and exotic and different from anything we saw before. But then in the end it all got translated into math formulas anyway. So that made me annoyed a little bit, because if in the end it's all translated to math, then why not just use math in the first place? Why couldn't they simply, knock on something, then the alien would do the same, then you have the basis of a common language already. So why the need to use complex pheromones and then light patterns to know which order to read the pheromones and then translate it all into equations, if you can just use basic math with any alien basically? So that's something that doesn't really make sense if you think about it. But I still kind of enjoyed the fact that the entire crew is problem solving, and they have to think outside the box, and they have to figure out some kind of intellectual puzzle. And so I did enjoy that in the episode, and it even felt kind of fresh for a change, even though a lot of it was inspired by movies such as Arrival and also The Sphere, which came out in 1998, in which they encounter some kind of alien sphere which has strange patterns on it moving, and it looks really similar to the hyperfield when they first approach it. It looks like a giant reflective surface with some lines in it, and then it can move and shapeshift, also similar to the spacecraft in the movie Flight of the Navigator, which was also a ship that can shapeshift and open up doors for you and stuff like that. And that's also something that happens later in this episode. And when they first get pulled into the hyperfield, it basically forms giant liquid tentacles to grab them and pull them in. So that reminds me of the movie The Abyss, which had the giant water tentacles, and also in Stargate we had that whoosh effect which vaporizes things and pulls them into the Stargate. So that was kind of similar, and having the whole episode about figuring out how to communicate with them, that's basically from the movie Arrival. I don't think this similarity is a coincidence. I think it's obviously was inspired by that. And then the aliens send a small spherical pod over, and at first I thought, oh, probably Michael is going to get into it by herself and then fly over to the aliens, and then the aliens will take the form of her dead father or something to talk with her, because, like in the movie Contact. So at least they didn't do that. But the ship does shapeshift just like in Flight of the Navigator and forms a door for them to take their delegation over to their side. And then they get there, and it looks like the bridge of the ship, because they created an environment for them that they think they will be comfortable on, and then again they just talk with them through a mist in the view screen. So again, it's like an arrival, so we don't actually get to see how these aliens look like in the flesh in this whole episode. I guess maybe in the next episode they will show us something finally. So there's not a lot of things happening in this episode, but I did kind of enjoy it because it actually felt like science fiction for a change, and not just action schlock, and not just running around corridors and shouting and saying that science is cool without doing anything scientific. So at least in this episode there are some clever things, even though it's kind of too clever, because if these aliens are really so super smart, wouldn't they be able to figure out how to communicate with humans instead of vice versa? If these aliens are so curious and they want to talk with them, wouldn't they be able to do it in some simpler way? Why is it that the humans have to figure out how the aliens talk like? So it's not really logical if you really think about all of this. So if it all translates into math in the end, so why not just knock on the wall and just make sounds, use math directly? Why the need to put light patterns on some air molecules to try to do it? And then there was the part when they had to figure out how to say the word we or us mathematically, and then Michael says, let's show them the ratio of the air, and then they'll realize we were talking about our own biology. So that was a good idea. The problem with that is that every single member of this away team is a different alien from a different planet. So how come the exact air ratio would fit all of them? I guess they all came from the same ship, so the ship has the same atmosphere. So I guess it would work, but there are all kinds of little things that I could nitpick if I really wanted to. But overall, at least this episode felt clever. It felt more intellectual than usual. So I did enjoy all the scenes of them trying to communicate with the aliens. I did like the fact that the aliens are much more exotic and unusual. And just as they finally managed to start communicating with the aliens, that's when Tarka ruins everything by breaching their bubble and trying to sabotage their entire hyperfield and whatever. So that will mess things up. And he throws Book through a glass in his ship, and that's always funny to me, because how many times was he thrown through glass in this season alone? Like, why does he keep reinstalling the same glass in his ship? Why not put some pillows instead? Because he keeps getting thrown around his ship every few episodes, and then fixes the same glass to be thrown through it again in the next episode. So that becomes kind of ridiculous after a while. And also, once again, there was a scene of a tragic backstory of someone. So this time Jet Reno suddenly tells Book that her wife died, and also she was trying to save someone who was horribly burned, and she kept him alive for 14 days, not letting that guy die, and basically torturing them until they died anyway. So once again, a tragic backstory, which doesn't really serve any purpose. It was just there to add some depth to the character, I guess. And it becomes unintentional comedy when every single episode has a minor character suddenly having a scene to talk about some tragic event in their lives. So it became unintentional comedy, I think. And also there was a line by the new Mr. No Response, the guy who replaced the previous No Response guy. And this guy is supposedly from this future. He didn't come from them from the past, right? We never saw him before season 3. So he's from the future, from this future, and now he says he used to be in the academy. But a few episodes ago they said that the academy did not exist for a century ever since the burn, that only now they reopened the academy. So if the academy didn't exist, then what academy is he talking about? So that means he's actually from the past, and yet we never saw him before. So who the hell is this guy, and why the need to replace the previous Mr. No Response with a guy who looks exactly like him, who says the exact same line, no response? And that's his whole purpose on the show. So why did they have to get rid of the previous Mr. No Response guy to replace him with this one? I have no idea. And it was also comical how long it took the crew to realize that Jet Reno got kidnapped. And how was she even able to get kidnapped? Because she had the comm badge on her when she met Tarka. So why not simply beam herself away immediately by clicking the comm badge? Somehow he managed to capture her and left her comm badge in engineering. So Zora, the ship's computer, thought she's still in engineering. And apparently the computer doesn't have any visual sensors. Like, she cannot scan the ship visually. So she didn't see everything that went on. But she senses that something is off. So the ship's computer has a gut feeling that something is off, and that's how they're able to solve anything. So once again, everything is about feelings and not facts. And the same with the aliens. Maybe that's why they cannot communicate with them using math alone. They have to use their feelings. That's why they can only communicate using those pheromones which demonstrate their feelings. That's how you communicate with the aliens. So that's one of the flaws of the show, which is all about feelings. And that's how they solve everything. So maybe in the next episode, which will be the last episode of the season, Michael will talk with the aliens, and she will cry really hard, and she will talk with them with their feelings and with her love, and that's how she will convince them not to take revenge after whatever Tarka is doing. And I kind of hope Tarka does get to go to the other universe to meet his alien lover. That will be a happy ending, and I hope to see that that universe will be the correct Star Trek universe, the utopian Gene Roddenberry's vision kind of universe, because I think this whole show is actually set in an evil dystopian future, maybe the same one we just saw in the new episode of Star Trek Picard, in the second episode of season 2. I talked about it in my review of that episode, that it has some clues that will allow me to say in my headcanon that all of Discovery is actually taking place in that alternate evil dystopian future, because when we see Picard's trophies in that reality, we see that he has the same Klingon spacesuit as we saw in STD, and he has the head of General Martok, and yet his ridges and his head look much more like the STD Klingons and not the Deep Space Nine Klingons. And we even see that Earth has a giant force field covering the whole planet, and Earth became a xenophobic planet just like in season 3 of Star Trek Discovery. So it seems to me as if all of Discovery is actually taking place in that evil dystopian future that we just saw in Star Trek Picard. And that will be my headcanon from now on. It actually solves all continuity issues perfectly. It's all in a different timeline altogether. So maybe Tarka will end up going to the real Star Trek universe, and we'll get to see some glimpse of that, and that will be a nice ending for him. And I'm assuming at some point Book will talk with these giant aliens and maybe use his empathic powers to communicate his pain to them, and then they will apologize to him, and then he will forgive them, and then there will be peace in the galaxy, and then they can go back home. But then something goes wrong when they try to get through the galactic barrier, and they accidentally get thrown back into the past, and they're again back in the 23rd century, and they cannot use time travel because it's forbidden. And so what they do is they abandon the ship, and they go into some cryo chambers on some planet, and they tell Zora to park the ship inside some nebula and to make it appear to be an older ship, so they get rid of all the programmable matter, and the ship will look like its old version, just like it looked like in the short trek Calypso. And that will explain why the ship had to wait for 1,000 years, because that's how they get to the future. They will cryo freeze themselves on some planet after they took all the shuttles there except one old shuttle which will remain on the ship, and they will freeze themselves and tell the ship to wait for 1,000 years until they get back to the future, and that will finally explain that short trek Calypso. So that's my prediction for the end of the season. And another funny silly thing I just realized is the aliens send the pod to pick up a few of these guys to take them somewhere, and then they put them in a place which looks just like the bridge, and then they again communicate with them through the view screen alone, exactly as they did in the shuttle bay. So what was the point of taking them anywhere if they kept communicating in the same exact way? Why not just keep doing that in the same place they were? Why the need to pick up a few people to take them into a different place, and then they continue communicating in the same exact way? So that's also kind of silly when I think about it. It seems just like filler. And also there was a silly line when they have to choose who will be the one to go. And as I said, I thought at first that Michael will go by herself, and I thought it's going to be like in Contact, that she will be flying through tunnels or whatever for half the episode, and her face will be splitting off to something that she will say later, and then she'll look out at the view and say they should have sent a poet. I was half expecting all of that stuff to happen, but then it turns out that they have plenty of room inside that pod, and so they can take a few people, and then they have to decide who to take. And then Michael says, we shouldn't take Zora for some reason. And I thought, wait a second, how can you take her even if you want to? How are you going to take the ship's computer, which they said plenty of times before that they cannot separate her from the ship, that she's stuck to the ship permanently and you cannot remove Zora from the ship any way you want to? What do you mean you think about taking her with you? How exactly can you do it? I guess maybe inside the droid, because they show that she can exist inside the droid sometimes not, sometimes she can, sometimes she cannot. So anyway, that line also made me facepalm, because what the hell is she talking about? How can you take Zora with you in that shuttle? So that was a ridiculous line. And then the aliens take them inside the pod somewhere, and then they appear to be on the bridge because that's where they would be comfortable with. So that is kind of similar to Contact, how they put her on the beach, which she always wanted to be on. So it was kind of similar, but also silly, because if the aliens keep communicating with them in the exact same way, through a window sending them lights, that's what they were doing in the docking bay. So what's the point of taking them somewhere else and then continuing the same way? And then they beam them right back immediately. And if they could beam them, then why they need to put them in that pod in the first place? Just because they wanted to have a cool visual effect, which is kind of like in Flight of the Navigator, of a shape-shifting vessel and all of that. That's all cool. I enjoyed this episode visually, but it all felt kind of too similar to other movies, and also we never actually get to see the alien environment. We don't see anything except that mist and some vague shape of an alien. We don't actually get to see anything, so it was kind of disappointing visually as well. Maybe in the next episode they will compensate it by showing us more of the alien environment, hopefully, if they don't cheapen out. So that's my thoughts about this episode. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss all of this in the comments below, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.